By saluting the three jewels. Namo Buddhaya.
Namo Buddhaya.
Namo Dharmaya.
Namo Dharmaya.
Namo Sanghaya.
Namo Sanghaya.
Namo Namah.
Namo Namah.
Om. So yes, a warm welcome to this morning's session. Particular welcome to those of you joining on Zoom. I must say I'm really enjoying the Zoom study. Those of you who are here in person, you don't get so much of a sense of it, but I think we're really getting stuck into the material. It's amazing how much of a kind of what's the right word? It's like the what's going on in our discussion group on Zoom and what's going on in this retreat seem to be sort of flowing very much in parallel. But it's very, very interesting how that's happening. And surely it's because we're being brought together on the basis of this material. So yeah, it's good anyway. Welcome. So this morning I'm going to attempt to get through two precepts. They're two short precepts, so I should be able to do it. The precepts number 3 and 8, and I'll deal with them in that order. So we're going backwards in order to go forwards. I didn't get around to 3 last time. So I'll read this precept. Once the Venerable Atisha was staying at Nye Tung, southwest of Lhasa. He was asked by the teachers of Shangna Chung, Kure, and Hung Sung, what are the teachings of logic? Brackets pramana. Atisha replied, there are many, both Buddhist and non-Buddhist, all of which are endless chains of ideation. They are not necessary, and there is no time to be wasted on them. It is time to condense the essential meaning of the teaching. And his disciples get in there like it's shot, don't they? So one of the teachers then asked, how do you condense the essential meaning of the teaching? To which he replies, practice love, compassion, and Bodhi mind toward all sentient beings. Make effort to accumulate merit and wisdom on behalf of them all. Dedicate all roots of virtue to the attainment of Buddhahood, together with all sentient beings, whose number would fill the sky. Understand that all these things are empty of self-nature, like a dream or a magician's illusion. So Bhante goes on to rightly contextualize Atisha's perspective on logic here. Saying Atisha was probably an expert in it, almost certainly an expert in it, and there was this whole kind of edifice built around the finer points of logic at the time. Atisha doesn't have a lot of time for it. In fact, he says there's no time to be wasted on it. I disagree. I know, shocker. The point, there's a number of points I want to make here, but the contextualization that Bhante gives here is really important. He's talking at a time when the kind of particularly the Indian mind, with its tendency to proliferate and construct abstractions, was well into its stride with logic. I don't think we're in the same position now. I think particularly in our kind of postmodern time, to describe something as a construction is almost a kind of criticism. We are so unlikely to end up, I think, in this kind of scholastic abstraction that Atisha was railing against. That I think the greater danger is we lose sight of logic. The greater danger for us, I think, is that we abandon logic prematurely rather than that we get carried away in scholastic excess. I should say I've got a vested interest in this. Yeah, well, my degree was in mathematics and philosophy, and formal logic was one of the few areas I think it's one of the few papers I got a first in. Was formal logic. So I'm a fan of logic. That's my statement of what do they call it? Interest. Thank you. Yeah, that's my vested interest in it. And yet, I think there's more to it than that too. So I'm going to try to make a case for at least a few areas where clear thinking is very much needed. And mostly this is around, this is a drop in the ocean really, but it's, I think a big part of it is being able to identify logical fallacies, or being able to identify sort of patterns of reasoning which don't reliably end up at the truth. So I'll give you some examples of these and see what you make of them. I've seen this written a number of times online, where people critiquing the idea of rebirth do so on the basis that it is a pre-modern idea. What do those pre-modern people know? There's kind of what could they possibly know about anything? Rebirth emerged from that time, from that intellectual atmosphere. Well, that's got to be bunkum as well. That's of course a false argument. Whatever the truth of rebirth is or not, the genetic fallacy, which is what that is basically saying the origins of that idea falsify it. It's just rubbish. There's loads of stuff that the pre-moderns knew which we'd agree with. It's not an argument for the falsity of rebirth. But I do think it's an interesting question then to ask, and this would take us too far afield to go into, but how would we go about assessing the truth of rebirth? I think that is an interesting question. I'll leave that one hanging. Now related to this genetic fallacy, which is looking at the origins of ideas, is what's called the ad hominem fallacy, which is another one, where basically the truth or falsity of an idea is judged on the characteristics of the person who holds the view. And I think this can go in a couple of directions, which Buddhists are guilty of in both directions. So on as it were, the negative side, it might be that there's a really odious, malevolent, deceitful person. I'm thinking particularly sort of these caricatures of politicians sometimes. That doesn't mean that everything they say is false. Yeah. However odious or misleading or whatever ignorant they are, it doesn't mean that whatever they say is false. And I think that's actually quite an important point for being able to find ground between different political views or different views of any kind, really. If you write off everything that somebody says, it becomes very, very difficult to have a conversation with people who like them. So that's the ad hominem, if you like, in the negative. But I think it also happens in the positive. So in the sense that because somebody's kind, benevolent, knowledgeable, that doesn't mean that everything they say is true. And in this particular case, I'm thinking of people like the Buddha, even people like Bhante, that their characteristics as good people does not mean that everything they say is true. But I do think it raises the question then, how do we relate to that, to what they say? Because I don't think it's as straightforward as saying everything they say is true, but there is a question there. What does our knowledge of their characteristics, or what role does the knowledge of their characteristics play in how we relate to what they say. I've got answers to all these questions, by the way, but I thought I'd throw them out as questions. So I've got two more that I've little kind of bees in my bonnet. One is equivocation. So equivocation is where you use the same word, or the same word has two different senses, two different meanings. I mean, technically, it's when you use a word in one part of an argument, and then you use a word with the same word with a different sense later on. But I'm going to use it in a broader sense here. So for example, Christianity and Buddhism, they both talk about compassion, love, being less selfish. They're the same then, aren't they? Yeah, they must be the same, surely. So here the equivocation is compassion, love, selflessness, I think are being used in very different ways, actually. Or at least there's certainly enough difference for it not to be a straightforward equation of Christianity and Buddhism. Similarly, you could say, well, quantum physics and Buddhism both talk about emptiness. Therefore, they must be the same. Good, there was a laugh there, so that means you don't believe that. And then a third one that's on my mind a lot is, Buddhism and political movements or social movements for change. They both talk about ethics. Therefore, Buddhism and those things are natural bedfellows. I think all of that needs unpacking. I mean, I should say I'm writing a book on trying to unpack the word compassion in this way to give some clarity to it. It's turning into quite a long book. So that's equivocation. Like how, and the question I'd throw in for discussion is where do you need to become clearer in the way you're using your words, particularly when those words are translations of other terms. And so where do you need to be more clear in the way you're using your terms? And the last one of these, I could go on and on with this, but the last one is that everyone's view is valid. So I think that's a fallacy as well. But I think I can bring some clarity to this by talking in terms of the niyamas. Yeah, so thinking particularly the three higher niyamas. So on the level of the mano niyama, or kind of psychological health, well-being, etc., I do think it's really important to listen to people, to take people seriously, to try to understand their perspective. I think actually that's essential if we're going to be communicating and if we're going to be relating compassionately to other people. And I don't think that means saying that whatever their view is right. Because the way I discriminate this is on the mano niyama level. Yes, in terms of making people feel at ease, making people feel comfortable. Yes, we need to be able to try to understand them. But on a karma niyama level, there are some things which lead to a more expansive, richer, more wholesome mind, and there are other things that don't. Yeah, or on a dharma niyama level, you could say, well, that there is the way things are. And there are other things which really, it's not the way things are. And we need to be able to, I think, discriminate between those levels. We need to be able to recognise that people's views matter to them and not collude with their delusions. I think that's essential from the perspective of helping people actually to be able to do that. All right, that's enough on my little going off on about clear thinking. I will come back to it a little bit at the end. So then one of the teachers asks Atisha, how do you then condense the essential meaning of the teaching? And so he's not very happy with these logical systems. he says, he goes to the heart of it. He says, practice love, compassion, and Bodhi mind towards all sentient beings. And I really love what Bhante says about this. Actually, his commentary is great here. So he says, in other words, love and compassion practiced to the extent of egolessness, these constitute the bodhicitta. Sometimes it is said that one's love and compassion should pass through the fires of the voidness and re-emerge the other side, purified, and they would then be the bodhicitta. Isn't that brilliant? Yeah, and again, it's talking about this ascending aspect and descending aspect. You sort of ascend with, if you like, the shamatha aspects of metta, karuna, the other Brahma Viharas, to the point where, to draw on what he says later on, it reaches the point of equanimity towards all beings, or it passes through the fires of voidness, and then it comes down the other side as bodhicitta. It then starts to inform our mental states, our actions, our interactions with others as bodhicitta. That's great. So my question around this for you is to what extent does that appear in the way you practice the Brahma Viharas? To what extent, when you're doing metta bhavana, if you do metta bhavana, and I think you should, if you do it, to what extent are you relating to metta in this, ascending to the point of egolessness and then descending with bodhicitta? And Bhante points out that you can almost read this straight out of the Karaniya Metta Sutta. When you look at particularly the last sort of stanzas of it, it's got this flavour of insight in it. And I think we've said this before, but there's a point at the end of this particular paragraph where he's saying, I think the trouble is we think of insight and egolessness and so on much too much in abstract metaphysical terms, rather than in terms of actual concrete living attitudes and behaviour. So this is linking back to the abstraction of the logic. It's just in another guise. He's saying, no, we need to think about it in terms of actual concrete living attitudes and behaviours. And in this particular case, he's talking about just being unselfish. That's a concrete, sort of livable, living way of relating to insight, egolessness, anatta. And then he goes on to talk about, understand that all these things are empty of self-nature, like a dream or a magician's illusion. It means that, this is me reading from Bhante, it says, it means that seeing things as events of which there is no subject separate from the event itself, separate in the sense of subject and object. In loving and compassionate activities, you lose all sense of self, that you are just an impersonal force, as it were, operating. Although impersonal, in another sense, you are more personal than ever. Then that impersonal operation in that way would be the bodhicitta. It's a personal impersonality. I say personal impersonality because usually if you say someone is impersonal, this suggests coldness and formality, but it isn't impersonal in that sense, but only in the sense that when you perform the action, there is no sense of a subject of the action, a subject performing that action as distinct from the action itself. I was reading this and I thought, oh, that rings a bell. And this illustrates quite an interesting sort of trajectory. So this is 1976 when Bhante's talking about this. Long before I was born, by the way. 1976, he's talking about this. But 20 years earlier, what was he doing? He was in Nagpur. It's 6th of December 1956. Dr. Ambedkar had just died. And as he writes to his friend Dinu, I was reading this recently in one of the Complete Works volumes. He gave something like 30 odd talks in the course of 4 days. Like, it's bad enough giving like one talk every 4 days or something, but like 30 odd talks, addressing thousands, tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands of people during this time. And he said, my experience during this time was most peculiar. I felt like an impersonal force. Yeah. So it's got this kind of this echoing of that experience he had in Nagpur that he's bringing in here to this discussion of the bodhicitta. And what's also interesting is that it prefigures, well, this is kind of Bhante archaeology in a way, it prefigures the two papers on reimagining the Buddha, where he says that personality is the highest category. That you can't think of a bodhisattva as impersonal because that's subpersonal. But then, of course, the paper on the suprapersonal force as well. So it's almost like, at this point, it feels, I was reading it out and I was thinking, this feels really clunky. It's a personal impersonality. He hasn't quite got the language for it right. But he had this sort of experience of inspiration. It's starting to crystallize in this seminar, and then it finds its more kind of systematized expression in those papers as the suprapersonal force. I just think that's very interesting, seeing how Bhante's thinking is evolving and developing through that. My question to you would be, where do you experience this? And are you even creating opportunities in which you can experience this? Even experience is sort of slightly wrong. It's not about having an experience. It's like, what are the conditions you need in order to be this suprapersonal or personal impersonality, this sort of vehicle for the bodhicitta? Where's that happening in your life? And then the last thing that Bhante says on this precept, at least in the extract that Sadaloka has given us, is he's talking about shunyata, and this is just amazing. I think this is such a good expression. It's almost like a kind of prose rendering of Bhante's poem "Life is King." He says, "This is the sort of thing that the teaching of shunyata is getting at. Life is bigger than your ideas about life. Life cannot be reduced to your ideas or to any system of your ideas. This is what shunyata really means, about higher and higher levels of the experience of life. That life is unique and indefinable, unconceptualizable." I really love this. I really, really love this, the way he's talking here, on so many levels. So firstly, what I love about it is Bhante is talking in such down-to-earth terms about something which can be so easily turned into highfalutin metaphysics. He's just talking about life. So I've got a little confession. It's just a big confession. I hate Buddhism. And what I mean by that is I hate the way that Buddhism can end up in these kind of systems of terms which are inaccessible to people, even inaccessible to Buddhists. We just kind of get caught up in our systems. The thing I love about what Bhante says here is you could talk to just about anyone who speaks English, and they'll know what you're talking about there. And it will move me. It's like sometimes the language we use. This is what I mean when I say I hate Buddhism. It's like the way that Buddhism as a subject can kind of wall itself off from the direct experience of people. And what Bhante's doing is he's just knocking down that wall. He's cutting straight through it, getting to the fact that we can't reduce life to our ideas about it. Life is unique and indefinable, unconceptualizable. And this also relates, I think this whole precept, which I just think is wonderful. It's not even 2 full pages, but it's wonderful. I think this whole precept is about clear thinking. And what I mean by that is the metaphor of clear is important. Clear in the sense of like a window, like clear glass. Clear thinking is the kind of thinking which enables you to see transparently into reality. Clear thinking is transparent to reality. And this is what Bhante is doing so masterfully here. It's what we don't do when we allow our ideas about, origins or people or like false equivalence of terms or psychology or whatever. That's when those get in the way of us seeing reality. That's not clear thinking. Those fallacies that I was pointing to earlier are examples of muddy thinking, because the ideas get in the way of our experience, our direct experience. And what Bhante is doing so well here, well, Atisha is doing it as well, but Bhante is particularly drawing it out, is just pointing back to this is what experience is like. It's clear in that sense. I might invite you just to, in the group, to see, are there any other examples of places where we as Buddhists can find ourselves in metaphysical abstraction, and where we could retranslate those terms such that they kind of cut through to the way things are. I'm almost not sure I'm going to have time for the next precept. I'll give it a go. There's less to say about this. So let's move on to precept number 8. It says at another time, and that's exactly where we're at now. So Atisha has entered parinirvana. Atisha's died, and now it is Drom, his disciple, who's in the Lama's chair. It's in the Lama's seat. One of the things which probably we're not going to have so much of an opportunity to see over this week, but you get a lot in the original text, is the sense of a living spiritual tradition. Where Atisha is sparking off Drom, who then sparks off his own disciples, and then sparks off their disciples, and so you get this kind of genealogy, a spiritual genealogy running through the text. I think it's in the Milarepa seminar, somewhere Bhante talks about the sign of a successful guru is that their disciples exceed them. Or I think he may even praise it negatively, in the sense that, he would say he would have failed if his disciples don't at least exceed him. Which is kind of like, oh gosh, better get going. But it is the case with Atisha. Atisha does seem to communicate that to Drom. Drom is as hot as kind of on the case with the Dharma as Atisha is, I would say. And then you've got these 3 brothers who are Potowa, Chennawa, and Puchangwa. And they do appear. So the first, Potowa and Puchangwa, are the lamas later on in the text, by the way. And they ask a very important question. Which is more important, to help living beings by means of the teaching, or to practice in an isolated place? So I don't know about you, but certainly for lots of people in my generation encountering the Dharma, this is a very live question. Yeah, it's the question around engagement, withdrawal. What's more important? What do we need to be doing? The teacher answered, "A beginner who has no internal realization cannot help living beings with the teaching. His blessing is like pouring from an empty jar. Nothing will come out. His advice is like unfermented beer. It has no essence." So there's 2 things I want to draw from this. Well, the first is, in a way, continuation of what I was saying before about using very down-to-earth language. We can imagine what it's like pouring from an empty jar. I don't think I've ever tried unfermented beer. Probably a bit nasty. sort of hops and sugar, probably. So yeah, but it's got no essence. It's not beer yet. So that's the first thing. Is it's using very down to earth imagery. But the second thing I think is probably more interesting. Is that the way that Drom seems to characterize what it is to help living beings by means of the teaching. So I'm thinking this particularly in relation to the whole topic of engaged or socially engaged Buddhism. Basically, Drom's just saying, look, it boils down to blessings, giving blessings and giving advice. Is that what engaged Buddhism looks like? Is that what it is to engage in the world as a Buddhist, to give blessings and advice? I sort of wonder, is this a limitation of Drom's understanding of what it is to help living beings by means of the teaching? Or is it a limitation of our understanding of what it is to help living beings by means of the teaching? I've got to say, I wasn't going to bring this in, but I will. This reminds me of my first meeting with Bhante. So I met Bhante, I think, 4 times. I say I think, because the last 2 were a bit of a blur. But the first one is quite clear to me. I quite vividly recall meeting him. And so I was, what would I have been, 23, 24. I knew I was moving to Oxford. I'd been going along to the West London Buddhist Centre for 9 months and really enjoyed it, really liked what I'd seen there. I felt very inspired by the people I met. But I knew I was moving to Oxford, and I knew that at that time there weren't any active, there weren't any sort of Triratna activities taking place. And I didn't quite know what to do about that. I was even wondering, do I just sort of carry on practicing Buddhism in another tradition? Yeah. So I went to Bhante, and as part of a very, very long list of questions that I asked him, I have no idea how we got through all these questions, but we did. One of the questions was around this. What do I do here? What do I do in relation to practicing Buddhism in Oxford? And his response to this was really interesting. It's two responses were interesting. So firstly, he said, he sort of listed all the different types of Buddhism. He said, well, if you're interested in meditation, you might find that the Zen group would be of interest to you. If you're interested in ritual, you might be interested in the Tibetan group. And so on. He kind of went through the different approaches to Buddhism, and he said, and these are their specialisms, and if you happen to be drawn to that specialism, well, you might feel at home there. And then he said, but with Triratna, it wasn't even Triratna then, it was FWBO, he said, but with us, we're known for friendship. Is that advice? It certainly wasn't a hard sell, but I was bowled over by that. I thought this guy is confident enough to be able to say, look, these are the options available to you, and this is our offering. Make up your own mind in a way. Anyway, the conversation went on there, and it got to the point where at one point he said, you could always get a few people together and invite an order member to come and speak. But you must ensure that there are enough people that it's worthwhile for them. I wasn't even a mitra at this point, and Bhante's suggesting setting up FWBO activities in Oxford. At the time, I was just like, oh no, no way, I'm starting a new job. Who am I? But 18 months later, I did, and we've had a kind of proto-Buddhist centre in Oxford for 10 years now. Blessings, advice, that's interesting, isn't it? But definitely that's what I found I drew from that conversation with Bhante. So that was the beginner who has no internal realization. Sorry, I got a bit lost with that. Then the person of admirable deeds who has not yet obtained the firmness of warmth does not have the ability to act for the benefit of living beings. Despite their admirable deeds, they don't have the ability to act for the benefit of living beings. His blessing is like pouring from a full vessel. When it has filled another, it itself is empty. His advice is like a butter lamp held in the hand. It may illuminate others, but the holder remains in the shadows. This last point, it raises the question for me, do you take your own advice? If somebody asks you for advice and you tell them something, or you do give them advice, suppose you do give them advice, is that something you would bring into your own life as well, or you do bring into your own life? I think it's very easy to sort of mouth the right things to say at a particular point, and even it might be true. Sort of teaching meditation. Often I become very absorbed when I'm teaching meditation, but I don't seem to quite take my own advice when it comes to meditating on my own. Why is that? It's the person of admirable deeds who's not yet obtained the firmness of warmth. I like what Bhante says here as well, but I won't go into that. And this thing about pouring from a full vessel, when it has filled another, it itself is empty. So there's a kind of it's an energetic. I don't know. It's like an energetic, not quite maturity there. You pour into someone, you activate somebody, or you energize someone else, but in yourself that depletes you somehow, because one isn't radiating as one would be in the stage of the firmness of warmth. However, when a person has entered the stages of the Aryas, whatever he does brings benefit to living beings. His blessing is like a magic vessel. Though it fills countless vessels, it does not empty itself. His advice is like a butter lamp held by the base. It illuminates others and the one who holds it as well. So what is it about the stages of the Aryas that make this possible? What is it about somebody who sees the way things are, that their blessing is like a magic vessel, and that their advice illuminates themselves as well as others? Therefore, this Kali Yuga is not the time for an individual to be of help to living beings unless he has cultivated love, compassion, and Bodhi mind in isolation. This is Drom sort of challenging the dichotomy of the question. He's saying, no, it's in the conditions of having cultivated these in isolation that it's possible to help. It is the time to guard against fettering passions. It is not the time to cut down the seedling of the magical medicine tree, but the time to cultivate it. I'm not sure what the magical medicine tree is, or whether one needs to cut it down in order to gain the medicine. But that seems to be the implication that, it's not. This is what Bhante says later on, doesn't he? He says it's a question of respecting the limits of one's own capacity. So not sort of prematurely rushing into to help when we don't really know what we're doing. Okay, before I give you some questions on this one to bring to the discussion groups, I thought I'd just do another bit of Bhante archaeology on this. So you've got this note at the end, and what you don't get here is the conversation that leads up to it. Partly because the conversation is broken and disjointed; it's not very clear. But in effect, what Drom is articulating here is a hierarchy. So he's saying, there's a beginner, then there's a person of admirable deeds who's not yet obtained the firmness of warmth, then there's the Aryas. So he's articulating a kind of stage of progression. And clearly someone in the seminar flicks to the back of the book, there's a footnote or something, they flick to the back of the book and they say, there's these 5 stages of the path, is that what he's talking about here? Is it this kind of progress, this progression? And Bhante, he sort of fumbles it slightly, and he has to look it up in the back of the book to remember what the different stages of the path are. And this is what they are, the accumulation path, etc. These 5 different paths, but he's keen to distinguish that from this hierarchical approach that Drom is taking. But he does say, he says, this is great. He says, no, it's a different classification, though it includes that. This is a quite important teaching. I've never given a lecture on it, but I've several times thought I should give a lecture on these 5 paths. the 5 stages of the path, really. So that's from my printed out version of the seminar. So that's the whole thing. He says it's quite an important teaching. I'd love to give a lecture on it. This was 1976. 1978, I believe, he gives the lecture on the system of meditation, which is it's a kind of reworking or revisioning of these 5 stages of the path. And then fast forward another 30 years, and you get revering and relying upon the Dharma, and I think it's initiation into a new life, isn't it? Where he particularly goes into it of the integration, positive emotion, spiritual death, spiritual rebirth, and receptivity. So it's like Bhante's aware of this teaching as being one which is potent, interesting. He wants to go into more. But it's still sort of germinal at this stage, and he alludes to things which then happen after that. So this, as far as I'm aware, is the first place where he sort of refers to that as a teaching. Okay, so my questions around this precept are when do you bless, and when do you receive blessings? Or how do you even relate to this idea of blessing? How does that land with you? What do you understand by that? And is this a sufficient perspective on engagement? That's a bit of a clunky way of asking that question. It's like, does the way that Drom talks about helping living beings with the teaching, is that enough? Good. Okay, so let's have a 20-minute tea break, and we'll return, and hopefully there's a little bit of material to go into there for a discussion group.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you.